reporting from the Washington Post on the Nord Stream explosions details new theories surrounding the 50-foot yacht that was initially believed by some to have been involved in the attack. That yacht is called the Andromeda, and it's possibly linked to a wealthy Ukrainian political figure. Buried several graphs deep in the story is over a totally different revelation that we here at Rising found to be pretty interesting. Don't talk about Nord Stream, according to the Post. Allies of the U.S. are avoiding conversation about the pipeline altogether. Quote, leaders see little benefit from digging too deeply and finding an uncomfortable answer, the diplomat said, echoing sentiments of several peers in other countries, so they would rather not have to deal with the possibility that Ukraine or allies were involved.
That's amazing.
It's a really great story.
At European and NATO gatherings with policymakers, it was described as this by a European diplomat. Quote, it's like a corpse at a family gathering. Everybody can see there's a body lying there, but pretends that things are normal. It's better not to know.
Is that how it goes? If there's a corpse at a family gathering, we all pretend not to know?
I mean, what kind of gathering? If it's a funeral, I think we're all very much acknowledging the corpse. If it's a different kind of gathering, then I have some questions to ask about what this family is up to. But that aside...
So U.S. and European officials said they still don't know for sure who is behind the underwater attack, but several said they share German skepticism that a crew of 6 people on one sailboat laid the hundreds of pounds of explosives that disabled Nord Stream. Later, they say that, if you're doing it from the sailboat, that would have been very difficult, even for the most experienced divers. Then there's some the Polish people are speculating that, well, maybe the sailboat was planted by Russia.
As a diversion, right? So there was initially when they reported on this boat that they found with traces of explosives on it as this aha moment. Like we found who did it. It's not a national group. We don't know anything about anything except it definitely wasn't a country, right? We talked at the time about how that's a very convenient outcome if you don't want there to be any consequences for the likely parties, United States, Ukraine, right? Or any of our allies. People who were critical of that story at the time also pointed out that the boat was so small that it was unlikely that it was going to be able to hold the level of explosives that were needed for such an adventure, or the number of people, divers, and equipment that would be necessary to go and do this deep sea technical dive and plant the explosives.
That's what I always say. If you're going to blow up a pipeline, bring a big enough boat, Briahna.
Well, now this story now just seems like an acknowledgement of the technical impossibility of the initial theory. And now they're saying, well, there could have been more boats. Or maybe this boat was just a diversionary boat. And I got to say, when you read this article in its entirety, it's difficult to see how this is helping the case of anyone who wants to plausibly point to the actor here being anything other than...
So I want to read another paragraph here. The German investigation has linked the yacht rental to a Polish company, which is in turn owned by a European company that's connected to a prominent Ukrainian, fueling speculation from Berlin to Warsaw to Kiev that a deep-pocketed partisan may have financed the operation.
And what deep-pocketed partisan might have an incentive to do something like that?
Could it be perhaps the president of the Ukrainian nation, perhaps? Look, we don't know.
We don't know.
But it seems more and more things seem to me to be pointing toward the Ukrainian government's responsibility, or some force, but not one working without the Ukrainian government's knowledge, but with the knowledge of Zelensky.
Yeah, well, what is it? What are the three? It's like motive, opportunity, and like a third thing that people look for when they're trying to see who the culprit is in a murder investigation.
The candlestick and the study and Professor Plum. You gotta have them all.
The fact that the motive is such a key signal here about who might have been responsible, it has been really downplayed in all of this. Russia had no motive. Eventually, they had to let go of the idea that Russia was involved. And even in this article, they always have to somewhat begrudgingly acknowledge that there's no evidence. They never say that, Russia didn't do it. They say, well, there's just no evidence. There's no evidence that Russia was involved. Right. Okay, great. Good enough. There's no evidence that Russia was involved. There's also no motive for Russia to be involved. But it's interesting that in this article, they also downplay motive. They say the identity of the Polish company and the Ukrainian individual, as well as his potential motive, remains unclear. Well, yes, you coming up with an abstract motive for a person that you have no idea who they are is unclear and difficult to do. But you're also ignoring asking the fundamental question of who benefits from the Nord Stream pipeline being blown up. Who benefits from the Nord Stream pipeline being blown up? And there's one very clear answer to that, and it's the United States of America and Ukraine. That's it. That's it. So at a certain point, unless you expect people to, if you have some other theory that explains why some random Ukrainian or Polish nationals, untethered from a relationship to a nation state, will want to take it upon themselves to do a very difficult technical dive in the middle of the ocean, avoiding all of the surveillance and other ships of all of these surrounding NATO countries, and then finish their task by just dumping a boat willy-nilly on the coastline without even wiping it down afterward. If this is a narrative that you think is satisfying to the public, go for it. But I think there's a reason why we don't talk about we don't talk about Nord Stream to the tune of we don't talk about Bruno is the way that they're handling things.
The Russians put that sailboat there to confuse us, but no one was confused but you.
Yeah,
to make us think it was this, but it's funny.
It's a wild story, and of course we're laughing about it not because it's not serious, but because it's so absurd. But
because the things the U.S. claims are absurd. And they're not really interested in the truth. And that makes you wonder why they're not interested in the truth. Do they already know the truth? We always have to put this in context of the things Joe Biden and Victoria Nuland said about what would be the ultimate fate of Nord Stream if Russia did something we didn't like.
Yes, there are ways. The reporter, I think, very astutely asked when Joe Biden made the comment about how Nord Stream 2 was never going to come, start running, start transporting gas. She asked, well, how can you determine that? You're not Germany. You don't have any say over that. And he says that, there are ways. I don't know how else you can start to read that. I mean, people who push back against the Cy Hirsch reporting say they pretend that it's based entirely on the comments from Joe Biden and people in the administration, which of course it is not. I encourage people who haven't read it yet to go ahead and read it and contrast the level of detail in that reporting to the conclusory guessing that's happening in these Wall Street Journal stories or the New York Times story, and make your own decision about what seems more likely. Of course, we don't know what is true, but what seems more likely and what's more substantiated. But even though Cy Hirsch's reporting is not based on the statements from the Biden administration, the statements from the Biden administration are incredibly damning, and the fact that there hasn't been more of an effort to respond to the implications of those statements really speaks to the level of impunity with which the United States feels like it can move in these spaces.
Right, and the question of whether the U.S. carried out a covert operation that it did not even brief the members of Congress who are supposed to be informed at least of sensitive military operations conducted against an ally, ostensibly as part of a war effort involved in a country we're not even at war with, technically.
Yeah, and Cy Hirsch's reporting, by the way, explains why, for technical reasons, Biden making these weird admissions enabled them to not have to brief Congress on some aspects of this in a way that ended up getting them, they were able to thread the needle of non-disclosure basically because of some oopsie daisies by Joe Biden that ended up inuring to their benefit. So again, go back to that initial reporting, see what you think, and let us know how you feel about it in the comments. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.